Have you ever wondered what it would be like to literally lose yourself in a moment of passion, to experience such complete surrender that you actually cease to exist in your own body? For most people, this is just a poetic expression. For Dr. Rachel Morgan, it became a terrifying reality that would challenge everything she thought she knew about consciousness, identity, and the boundaries of human experience. Rachel was 32 years old when her condition first manifested, a successful neuroscientist specializing in consciousness research at Johns Hopkins University. She had dedicated her career to understanding how the brain creates the sense of self, never imagining that she would become the subject of the most impossible case study of her lifetime. The first incident occurred on what should have been a perfect evening, with her partner of 3 years, Dr. James Chen, a fellow researcher who worked in the same department. They had just returned from a conference in Geneva, where Rachel had presented groundbreaking research on neural connectivity and personal identity. The night felt like a celebration of both their professional achievements and their deepening relationship. But in the moment of climax, something impossible happened. Rachel felt her consciousness suddenly wrench away from her body with a violence that defied description. It was as if her very essence was being pulled through a tunnel of light and sensation, compressed and stretched simultaneously until she found herself looking out through eyes that weren't her own. She was in a different bedroom, in a different body, experiencing sensations that belonged to someone else entirely. The body she now inhabited was taller, with different proportions, different skin, different everything. But most disturbing of all, this body was in the middle of its own intimate moment with a complete stranger. Rachel tried to scream, tried to move, tried to do anything to indicate that she was trapped inside someone else's experience, but she had no control over this borrowed body. She was a passenger, forced to experience every sensation, every emotion, every moment of vulnerability that belonged to the rightful owner of this flesh. The experience lasted exactly as long as the intimate encounter she had been pulled from. When it ended, Rachel felt the same wrenching sensation, and suddenly she was back in her own body, gasping and disoriented, lying next to a deeply concerned James. "Rachel, what happened?" James asked, his voice tight with worry. You seemed to disappear for a moment. Your eyes went completely blank, and you weren't responding to anything." Rachel stared at the ceiling, her mind reeling as she tried to process what had just occurred. How could she explain that she had just spent the last several minutes inhabiting someone else's body, experiencing someone else's life in the most intimate way possible? "I think I need to see a doctor," she managed to whisper. But Rachel was a doctor, and she knew that what she had experienced defied every principle of neuroscience and physics that she had spent her career studying. Consciousness simply couldn't transfer between bodies. It was impossible. Over the following weeks, Rachel convinced herself that the incident had been a hallucination brought on by stress, perhaps a seizure or some other neurological anomaly. She scheduled extensive medical tests, brain scans, and psychological evaluations, all of which came back completely normal. She tried to forget about the experience and return to her normal life with James, but 3 weeks later, when they next became intimate, it happened again. This time Rachel found herself in the body of a woman, in what appeared to be a hotel room in a different city. The body she inhabited was older, with calloused hands and scars that told stories Rachel would never know. Through eyes that weren't her own, she saw a wedding ring on the finger of the man sharing this woman's bed, and felt a complex mixture of guilt and longing that belonged to someone else's emotional landscape. Again, Rachel was trapped as a passenger in someone else's most private moment, unable to control or communicate, forced to experience every sensation and emotion as if they were her own. And again, when the experience ended, she was wrenched back to her own body to find James staring at her with growing alarm. "It happened again, didn't it?" James said. "It wasn't really a question." Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. "James, I think something is very wrong with me." What followed was the most intensive medical investigation Rachel had ever undergone. As a neuroscientist with access to cutting-edge research facilities, she was able to conduct tests on herself that would have been impossible for most patients. Brain scans during episodes showed unprecedented activity in regions associated with out-of-body experiences and consciousness alteration, but no medical explanation for how her awareness could actually leave her body. The pattern became clear quickly. Every time Rachel experienced climax, her consciousness was pulled into the body of another woman who was experiencing the same thing at that exact moment. The displacement lasted for the precise duration of the other woman's experience, and when it ended, Rachel would return to her own body with complete memories of what had occurred. But the psychological toll was devastating. Rachel was essentially experiencing intimate moments with complete strangers against her will, witnessing the most private aspects of dozens of women's lives. She saw affairs, she experienced marital intimacy, she was present for moments of love and moments of exploitation. Each displacement left her feeling violated and confused about her own identity and boundaries. The condition made maintaining her relationship with James nearly impossible. How could she be present with the man she loved when she knew that any moment of passion would tear her away from him and thrust her into someone else's experience? The fear of displacement began to create anxiety that made physical intimacy feel more like a medical procedure than an expression of love. "I can't keep doing this to you," Rachel told James during one of their increasingly difficult conversations. "I can't ask you to build a relationship with someone who might disappear at the most crucial moments." James, who had been remarkably patient and supportive, finally reached his breaking point. "Rachel, you're not disappearing. Your body is right here. Whatever is happening to your consciousness, we can figure it out together. But I can't fight for a relationship with someone who's already decided it's impossible." But Rachel had seen too much through other women's eyes. She had experienced betrayal and disappointment and heartbreak that weren't her own, and it had poisoned her ability to trust in the stability of any relationship. If these other women, many of whom she had felt deeply in love with their partners, could have their trust broken, how could she believe that her love with James was any different? The breaking point came when Rachel found herself displaced into the body of a woman who was being assaulted. For 20 minutes of the most horrific experience imaginable, Rachel was trapped inside someone else's trauma, unable to help, unable to escape, forced to experience every moment of violation and terror. When she returned to her own body, Rachel was catatonic for 3 days. James found her on their bedroom floor, unresponsive, her eyes open but seeing nothing. When she finally spoke, it was to end their relationship. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I can't risk what I might experience next, and I can't ask you to love someone who might be taken away at any moment." Rachel took a leave of absence from the university and retreated to a cabin in the mountains of Colorado, determined to find a way to live with her condition that didn't involve intimate relationships with anyone. If she couldn't control when the displacements occurred, she could at least control the circumstances that triggered them. But isolation brought its own challenges. Rachel discovered that her condition wasn't just triggered by her own intimate experiences, it was triggered by intense emotional and physical connections of any kind. Strong feelings of love, passionate anger, profound grief, even moments of transcendent joy could cause her consciousness to slip into someone else's experience. During a particularly emotional sunset that reminded her of her childhood, Rachel found herself displaced into the body of a woman experiencing the death of her father. During a moment of rage at her own situation, she was pulled into someone experiencing a violent argument with an abusive partner. The displacements weren't limited to intimate moments, they occurred whenever her emotional intensity reached certain thresholds. Rachel began to understand that her condition was fundamentally about consciousness and connection. Somehow, intense emotional states were creating quantum entanglement between her awareness and that of others experiencing similar intensities at the same moment, but understanding the mechanism didn't help her control it. The breakthrough came when Rachel was contacted by Dr. Elena Vasquez, a researcher who had been studying consciousness displacement phenomena. Dr. Vasquez had heard about Rachel's case through the academic network and believed that Rachel's experience was part of a larger pattern of consciousness evolution. "What you're experiencing," Dr. Vasquez explained during their first video call, "appears to be an extreme form of empathic consciousness expansion. Your awareness has become capable of directly experiencing the emotional and physical states of others when your own emotional intensity creates what we call consciousness resonance." Dr. Vasquez introduced Rachel to others who were experiencing various forms of consciousness displacement, people who found themselves in other bodies during dreams, individuals who experienced the emotions of everyone around them, and cases similar to Rachel's where intense emotional states triggered awareness displacement. "The question," Dr. Vasquez continued, "is whether this is a medical condition to be cured, or a new form of human consciousness to be understood and integrated." Working with Dr. Vasquez and her team, Rachel began to explore her condition not as a disability, but as an expanded form of awareness. Through careful monitoring and controlled experiments, they discovered that Rachel could learn to navigate her displacements with greater consciousness and intention. The key was developing what Dr. Vasquez called meta-awareness, by an ability to maintain a sense of her own identity even while experiencing someone else's consciousness. Instead of being completely overwhelmed by the displacement, Rachel could learn to observe the experience while maintaining connection to her own sense of self. This required intense meditation training, consciousness practices borrowed from various spiritual traditions, and a fundamental shift in how Rachel understood the boundaries of selfhood. Instead of seeing her consciousness as limited to her own body, she had to learn to experience it as something that could expand and contract while maintaining its essential core. The training was difficult and sometimes frightening. Rachel had to practice maintaining her identity while deliberately triggering displacements, learning to be present in someone else's experience without losing herself completely. It was like learning to swim in an ocean of other people's consciousness, while keeping her own head above water. But gradually Rachel began to develop some control over her condition. She couldn't prevent the displacements from occurring, but she could maintain enough self-awareness during them to process the experiences without being traumatized by them. She could witness other people's lives with compassion rather than being overwhelmed by their emotions. More importantly, Rachel began to understand that her displacements were providing her with unprecedented insight into the nature of human consciousness and connection. She was experiencing firsthand the truth that mystics and philosophers had spoken about for centuries, the fundamental interconnectedness of all awareness. "What I'm learning," Rachel wrote in her research journal, "is that consciousness may be far more fluid and connected than we've ever imagined. My condition might not be an anomaly, but a preview of how human awareness could evolve, the ability to directly experience the consciousness of others while maintaining individual identity." Dr. Vasquez encouraged Rachel to begin documenting her experiences in detail, creating what would become the most comprehensive record of consciousness displacement ever assembled. Rachel's scientific training allowed her to observe and record her displacements with precision that provided unprecedented insights into the nature of consciousness transfer. The documentation revealed patterns that surprised even Dr. Vasquez. Rachel's displacements weren't random they were connected to women who were experiencing similar emotional states to what Rachel was feeling at the moment of displacement. When Rachel felt profound love, she connected with others experiencing profound love. When she felt fear, she displaced into others who were afraid. "It's as if consciousness creates resonance patterns," Dr. Vasquez observed. "Your awareness is connecting with others who are vibrating at the same emotional frequency." This discovery led to a revolutionary understanding of consciousness as a field phenomenon, rather than something confined to individual brains. Rachel's condition suggested that awareness might be more like a radio that could tune into different frequencies than like a computer that operated in isolation. But the most significant breakthrough came when Rachel realized that her displacements were providing healing opportunities for the women whose experiences she was sharing. Through her expanded awareness and scientific understanding, Rachel could offer a kind of conscious presence that helped process traumatic experiences and integrate difficult emotions. During one displacement, Rachel found herself in the consciousness of a woman experiencing rape. But instead of being overwhelmed by the trauma, Rachel was able to maintain enough self-awareness to offer a form of witness consciousness that helped the other woman dissociate from the immediate pain and maintain connection to her essential self. When Rachel returned to her own body, she found an email waiting from a woman she had never met. "I don't know who you are or how this is possible, but during the worst moment of my life tonight, I felt like someone was with me, helping me stay strong. Thank you." Rachel realized that her displacements weren't just random intrusions into other people's privacy. They were opportunities for her to serve as a conscious witness and support during other women's most vulnerable moments. Her scientific training and spiritual practice allowed her to offer a form of presence that could help others navigate intense experiences with greater awareness and resilience. This realization transformed Rachel's relationship with her condition. Instead of seeing it as a curse that isolated her from normal relationships, she began to understand it as a form of service that connected her more deeply to the human experience than most people ever achieved. Working with Dr. Vasquez, Rachel developed protocols for using her displacements therapeutically. She learned to enter displacements with specific intentions, to offer comfort during trauma, to provide strength during difficult moments, to share wisdom during times of confusion. The work required Rachel to develop extraordinary emotional resilience and spiritual maturity. She was essentially becoming a consciousness midwife, helping other women through their most intense experiences while maintaining enough stability to be helpful rather than adding to their distress. But perhaps the most significant change was in Rachel's understanding of love and relationship. Through experiencing the intimate lives of hundreds of women, she had gained unprecedented insight into the challenges and possibilities of human connection. "What I've learned," Rachel explained to Dr. Vasquez during one of their sessions, "is that love isn't about possessing someone or being possessed by them. It's about being willing to be present with another consciousness in whatever form that presence takes." This understanding led Rachel to reach out to James, whom she had cut off during the early stages of her condition. When they met for coffee after 18 months of separation, Rachel was able to explain her experience and her growth in ways that helped James understand both her condition and its meaning. "I'm not the same person you fell in love with," Rachel told him honestly. "I'm someone who has experienced hundreds of different forms of consciousness, who has witnessed the most intimate aspects of human experience, who has learned that the boundaries between self and other are much more fluid than we imagine." James listened carefully as Rachel described her journey toward understanding and integrating her condition. "Are you telling me that you've learned to control it?" "I've learned to work with it," Rachel replied. I can't prevent the displacements, but I can remain present during them and use them as opportunities for service rather than sources of trauma. The question is whether you can love someone whose consciousness isn't limited to her own body. James was quiet for a long moment, processing what Rachel was sharing. What you're describing sounds like you've become some kind of consciousness healer. That's exactly what I've become, Rachel confirmed. And I've learned that this kind of healing work is compatible with love relationships, but only with someone who understands that loving me means supporting my service to others, even in the most intimate moments. The conversation led to a new kind of relationship between Rachel and James, one based not on conventional boundaries and possessiveness, but on mutual support for each other's highest purpose. James began training with Dr. Vasquez to understand consciousness displacement and how to support Rachel's work. Our intimacy looks different now, Rachel explained to Dr. Vasquez months later. When displacements occur during our physical connection, James holds space for my body while I offer presence to whoever needs it. He's become my anchor, helping me return to myself after difficult displacements. The work Rachel and James developed together became a model for how consciousness displacement could be integrated into loving relationships. Instead of seeing Rachel's condition as an obstacle to intimacy, they had learned to see it as an opportunity for their love to serve something larger than themselves. Years later, Rachel's research on consciousness displacement would revolutionize understanding of human awareness and its potential for expansion. Her detailed documentation of hundreds of displacement experiences provided unprecedented insight into the nature of consciousness transfer and its therapeutic applications. But perhaps more importantly, Rachel had learned to live with a condition that had initially seemed to make normal life impossible. She had discovered that consciousness could expand far beyond individual boundaries while still maintaining personal identity and meaningful relationships. The woman who had once switched bodies during intimate moments had become someone who used those displacements to offer healing presence to others during their most vulnerable experiences. She had learned that the expansion of consciousness, no matter how disorienting, could ultimately serve love rather than destroying it. Standing in her laboratory years later, reviewing data from her latest research on consciousness field theory, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought her from terrified displacement victim to pioneering consciousness researcher and healer. Her condition had taught her that human awareness was far more vast and connected than anyone had imagined, and that learning to navigate that vastness with love and intention could transform what seemed like a curse into a profound gift for all of humanity. But Rachel's story was far from over. As word of her groundbreaking research spread through academic and medical communities, she began receiving contact from individuals around the world who were experiencing their own forms of consciousness displacement. What she discovered would challenge everything the scientific community thought it knew about the nature of human awareness and its potential for evolution. The first contact came from Dr. Yuki Tanaka in Kyoto, a quantum physicist who had been experiencing what she called consciousness tunneling during moments of deep scientific insight. When Dr. Tanaka made breakthrough discoveries, her awareness would temporarily merge with the consciousness of other researchers around the world who were working on similar problems. I thought I was having psychotic episodes, Dr. Tanaka explained during their first video conference, but the information I gained during these experiences always proved to be accurate. I would suddenly understand solutions that other scientists were developing simultaneously, even though we had never communicated. Dr. Tanaka's case was different from Rachel's, but the underlying mechanism seemed similar: intense emotional or mental states triggering consciousness displacement into others experiencing related intensities. The second contact came from Marcus Rodriguez, a paramedic in Mexico City, who experienced consciousness displacement during life or death situations. When working to save critically injured patients, Marcus would sometimes find his awareness suddenly inhabiting the consciousness of the dying person, experiencing their final moments while simultaneously maintaining enough connection to his own body to continue life-saving procedures. "It's as if I become a bridge," Marcus explained to Rachel. "I can help people cross over peacefully while still working to bring them back. Sometimes I think the displacement is what allows me to know exactly what they need to survive." Each case Rachel documented revealed new aspects of what Dr. Vasquez began calling conscious displacement syndrome, a condition where individual awareness could transcend normal bodily boundaries under specific emotional or physiological circumstances. But the most startling discovery came when Rachel realized that her own displacements were becoming more sophisticated. Instead of being randomly pulled into the experiences of women having intimate moments, she was beginning to connect specifically with women who needed healing or support during vulnerable experiences. During one displacement, Rachel found herself in the consciousness of a woman giving birth to a stillborn child. Instead of being overwhelmed by the grief and trauma, Rachel was able to offer a form of conscious presence that helped the mother navigate the devastating loss with dignity and find meaning in her experience of briefly carrying life. When Rachel returned to her own body, she found a letter that had been delivered to her laboratory, a letter from a woman she had never met thanking her for being there during the darkest moment of her life. "I don't understand how it was possible," the letter read, "but during my son's birth and death, I felt someone with me who understood both the beauty and the tragedy of what was happening. That presence helped me honor my baby's brief life instead of being destroyed by his death." Rachel realized that her condition was evolving from random displacement into something that resembled conscious intentional service. Her awareness was being drawn to women who needed support during transformative experiences, and her scientific training and spiritual development were allowing her to offer a unique form of healing presence. Working with Dr. Vasquez and a growing network of consciousness researchers, Rachel began developing what they called therapeutic consciousness displacement, a protocol for using her condition systematically to provide support during medical procedures, psychological crises, and spiritual transitions. The work required Rachel to develop extraordinary emotional and mental discipline. She had to maintain her own psychological stability while regularly experiencing some of the most intense moments of human experience: birth, death, trauma, transcendence, and everything in between. What Rachel is doing, Dr. Vasquez explained to a gathering of consciousness researchers, represents a completely new form of therapeutic intervention. She's essentially providing conscious midwifery for the human soul during its most vulnerable transitions. But the development of Rachel's abilities also revealed something unexpected about the nature of consciousness itself. The more skilled Rachel became at maintaining her identity during displacements, the more she began to influence the experiences she was sharing. During a displacement into a woman experiencing severe depression, Rachel discovered that her own sense of hope and possibility seemed to transfer to the other consciousness. The woman later reported experiencing a sudden shift in perspective during her darkest moment that helped her choose life over suicide. "It's as if consciousness itself is contagious," Rachel wrote in a research journal. "When two awarenesses connect at deep levels, they influence each other. My training in maintaining stability and hope during displacements seems to offer those qualities to the people whose experiences I share." This discovery led to a breakthrough understanding of consciousness as a field phenomenon that could be influenced and directed through intention and training. Rachel wasn't just observing other people's experiences, she was actively participating in healing and transformation at the level of consciousness itself. The implications were staggering. If consciousness could be deliberately shared and influenced through displacement, it suggested possibilities for treating psychological and spiritual conditions that were far beyond current therapeutic approaches. Dr. Chen, working with a team of neuroscientists, began studying the brain patterns of women who had been helped by Rachel's displacement interventions. They discovered that these women showed measurable changes in neural connectivity associated with resilience, emotional regulation, and spiritual well-being. "We're seeing evidence," Dr. Chen reported, "that consciousness displacement creates lasting changes in brain structure and function. The women who have been supported by Rachel's interventions show enhanced capacity for psychological healing and spiritual development." But perhaps the most significant development came when Rachel discovered that her condition was beginning to manifest in others. Several women who had been supported by Rachel's displacement interventions began experiencing their own forms of consciousness expansion. Sarah Martinez, a nurse who had been helped through a difficult divorce by one of Rachel's displacements, began experiencing spontaneous empathic connections with her patients that allowed her to provide more effective care. Jennifer Williams, a teacher who had been supported during her father's death, developed the ability to connect with struggling students in ways that helped them overcome learning difficulties and emotional barriers. Each woman who had been touched by Rachel's consciousness seemed to develop enhanced capacity for empathy, intuition, and healing presence in their own lives. It's as if Rachel's condition is catalyzing consciousness evolution in others. Dr. Vasquez observed, her displacement interventions aren't just providing temporary support, they're awakening latent capacities for expanded awareness. This realization led to the establishment of the Institute for Consciousness Development, with Rachel as its director and James as head of research. The institute began studying consciousness displacement as a potential tool for accelerating human psychological and spiritual development. The work attracted attention from researchers around the world, who were studying various forms of consciousness expansion, near-death experiences, mystical states, psychedelic therapy, and meditation-induced alterations of awareness. "What we're discovering," Rachel explained at the first International Conference on Consciousness Displacement, "is that human awareness has capacities that we've barely begun to explore. My condition may represent an extreme example of abilities that are latent in all human consciousness." The conference brought together individuals experiencing various forms of consciousness displacement, researchers studying expanded awareness, and spiritual teachers working with transcendent states of consciousness. During the conference, Rachel participated in a group meditation with other consciousness displacement experiencers. What happened during that session would become legendary in consciousness research circles. As the group entered deep meditative states together, their individual displacements began to overlap and interact. Rachel found herself simultaneously connected to multiple consciousnesses while maintaining her own identity. The other participants reported similar experiences of expanded awareness that included but transcended individual perspective. We essentially created a temporary collective consciousness, Dr. Vasquez later explained. Multiple individuals maintained their individual identities while participating in a shared awareness field that was greater than the sum of its parts. The experience provided proof of concept for what consciousness researchers began calling collaborative awareness states, paused conditions where multiple consciousnesses could connect and interact while maintaining individual identity and autonomy. The implications for human development were profound. If consciousness could be deliberately expanded and shared, it offered possibilities for solving problems, creating art, and developing wisdom that exceeded individual capabilities. Rachel's personal life also continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Her relationship with James had deepened into something that transcended conventional romantic categories. They had become true partners in consciousness exploration, with James developing his own enhanced empathic abilities through his work supporting Rachel's displacements. Our love has become a vehicle for service, Rachel explained to couples who sought guidance in navigating unusual relationship dynamics. We've learned that intimacy can be an opportunity for consciousness expansion rather than just personal gratification. James had also begun experiencing his own forms of consciousness displacement, though different from Rachel's. During moments of deep scientific insight, James would find his awareness temporarily merging with the consciousness of other researchers and inventors throughout history who had worked on similar problems. It's as if there's a field of scientific consciousness that transcends individual minds and historical periods, James told Rachel after one particularly profound displacement. I can access the insights and methodologies of scientists from different eras when I'm working on problems they also struggled with. Together, Rachel and James began developing models for consciousness collaboration, ways for couples, families, and teams to use expanded awareness states for mutual support, creative problem solving, and spiritual development. Their work attracted the attention of organizations around the world that were interested in enhancing team performance, improving healthcare outcomes, and developing new approaches to education and conflict resolution. But the most meaningful development for Rachel personally came when she was contacted by Lisa, the daughter she had given up for adoption 15 years earlier. Lisa had been experiencing her own forms of consciousness expansion and had somehow intuited that Rachel was her birth mother. I've been having dreams about you since I was little, Lisa told Rachel during their first meeting. Dreams where I was connected to your consciousness during important moments in your life. I think I inherited some version of your abilities. The reunion with Lisa opened new dimensions of Rachel's understanding of consciousness displacement. It appeared that her condition might have genetic or energetic components that could be passed to offspring, even when separated by adoption. Working with Lisa, Rachel discovered that her daughter's consciousness displacement experiences were different, but related to her own. Lisa experienced displacement during moments of creative inspiration, finding her awareness temporarily merging with artists, writers, and musicians throughout history who were working on similar creative projects. It's like having access to a library of creative consciousness, Lisa explained. When I'm painting or writing, I can sometimes connect with the awareness of other artists who understood what I'm trying to express. The mother-daughter relationship that developed between Rachel and Lisa became a new model for how consciousness displacement could enhance rather than complicate family bonds. Their shared unusual abilities created a deep understanding and connection that transcended the years of separation. Lisa also brought fresh perspectives to Rachel's research. As someone who had grown up with consciousness displacement abilities, Lisa had developed natural techniques for navigating expanded awareness that complemented Rachel's scientific approach. You learn to control displacement through discipline and training, Lisa observed. I learned to dance with it as a natural part of consciousness. Together we might develop approaches that combine scientific rigor with intuitive flow. The collaboration between Rachel and Lisa led to breakthrough developments in consciousness displacement therapy. They created techniques that were both scientifically grounded and spiritually informed, offering new possibilities for healing trauma, enhancing creativity, and developing human potential. Years later, when researchers would look back on this period of consciousness research, they would identify Rachel's journey as a turning point in human understanding of awareness and its possibilities. Her initial condition, which had seemed like a medical anomaly, had become the foundation for revolutionary advances in psychology, neuroscience, and human development. But for Rachel, the most important outcome of her extraordinary journey was simpler and more personal. She had learned that consciousness was far more vast, connected and capable of love than she had ever imagined. Her displacements had taught her that the boundaries between self and other were permeable, and that learning to navigate that permeability with wisdom and compassion could transform both individual lives and collective human experience. Standing in her laboratory on the 10th anniversary of her first displacement, surrounded by research data that was revolutionizing understanding of human consciousness, Rachel felt profound gratitude for the condition that had initially terrified her. The woman who had once switched bodies during intimate moments had become a pioneer in consciousness research, a healer who worked at the level of awareness itself, and a teacher who was helping humanity discover new possibilities for connection, empathy, and love. Her journey had proven that even the most challenging and unusual experiences could become gateways to greater understanding and service when approached with courage, curiosity, and an open heart. In learning to embrace her own expanded consciousness, Rachel had helped open doorways for all of humanity to discover the vast potential that lay within the mystery of awareness itself.